Welcome, welcome. Greetings, grand and glorious rising. Saturday, November the 9th. I am Reverend Lady Mother, Professor Saundra Addison-Britto, and we're here with lesson number 3 of spiritual intelligence. So get your breakfast, drink, beverage, coffee, tea, juice, bagel, donut, grits and eggs, and spend the next 30, 40 minutes with me. Hit like and share this YouTube link with your network. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, Triumph Life Center at Gmail. Triumph Life Center on YouTube, I'm sorry. And you can contact us at triumphlifecenter at gmail.com. Just waiting as you're coming in. You can join us in the Zoom room. And the Zoom room is, the login is 566-003-8423. So just stay with us. We will be right back. All right. All right, so again, welcome to today's seminar on spiritual intelligence. This is the third in a 4-part series on the subject of spiritual intelligence, and they're all sponsored by Triumph School of Integral Studies, which is the academic branch of Triumph the Church of the New Age. So I want to just get right into it because we have a lot to cover, and I want to stay within 45 minutes on today. So let's see how we can do. So let me just review for those of you that are just coming in. Let's just take a minute and breathe. Let's take a collective breath together. And just feel that throughout your body. From last week to this week, there's been so much that has occurred. So much energy, this whirling around, and so many thoughts and ideas and emotions and feelings. And in some ways, the noise has quieted down. In other ways, it's shifted into another stream. But we're here. We're here, and it is another week, another Saturday, another time for us to just be together in this conversation. How's everybody feeling today? Maybe still a little anxious. Energy still just unable to lock it down into a coherent direction, and that's understandable. For some, it was a exciting week that exceeded their expectations, and for others, this week was one that bursted the bubble. And really many millions of people feel a setback. We'll try to just open this up energetically through this lesson as we continue with the discussion on spiritual intelligence. So, spiritual intelligence, as we open it up in week one, we talked about what is spirit. And we identified three key forms of intelligence. If you remember, if you don't, go back and watch lesson one. That was on October 26th. Lesson number 2 was last week, November the 2nd. And then today's lesson will be posted on YouTube at the conclusion of this lesson. So we talked about three forms of intelligence: IQ, intellectual quotient. We talked about EQ, emotional intelligence, and then SQ, spiritual intelligence. And we defined IQ, or intellectual intelligence, as how one measures, or how you measure one's ability to levels of comprehension. So the core of it is understanding and comprehension. Again, go back and look at lesson one. I can't open that up again, but go back. It's important that we build one stone upon another in this series. Then we opened up the idea of emotional intelligence, or EQ. And we said it's one's ability to monitor one's and regulate one's energetic movement. So it's very personal. We said emotional intelligence was the capacity one has for self-awareness, and integration, or the ability to integrate and recognize within oneself truth from falsehood. So to integrate new knowledge, integrate what you know, what you feel, but parse out internally within yourself truth and falsehood. And then we introduced spiritual intelligence, which we said answers the question why of life. Why am I here? IQ and EQ helps us to understand how do we do life? How do I maintain or manage in this world? Whereas IQ helps us to understand, go behind the how to understand the why. It further details the nature of reality underlying all existence, the nature of what really is real, and that lies behind all existence. In lesson two, we talked about why is spiritual intelligence, why is it important to know about? Who cares? And if you've been with me these past these past couple of weeks, you know that taking a breath and breathing is important for this journey. For it is in the breath, it is in our collective breathing and paying attention to the breath that you'll realize as we go through this that we get a little bit closer to hearing, seeing, knowing from a spiritual dimension. So lesson two, last week, we asked the question, why is spiritual intelligence important? And so we went through a few reasons. I'm going to just summarize them as I prepare to go into today's lesson. So we said, one, spiritual intelligence facilitates the integration between IQ and EQ, emotions, and intellect. It integrates those two and brings them to an exponential new level of awareness. We'll talk more about that later. We said spiritual intelligence facilitates awareness or consciousness. It's another way. I use the word awareness here because consciousness is another one of those terms that it's a loaded term. And so it means different things to different people. And I want to be clear. Awareness on in-depth, not just surface levels, but in-depth, internal awareness, external awareness, and awareness of the why of me behind the me. We talked about last week the you behind the you. Spiritual intelligence also facilitates knowledge production. The source of knowledge. Where do you get your knowledge? It's internet, social media, IG, TikTok, the radio, TV news, your pastor, from your school, your colleagues. Where do you get your knowledge? What is the source? And the source of your knowledge really speaks to the credibility, the validity, the trustworthiness of that knowledge. So spiritual intelligence facilitates knowledge production or the source of knowledge. How do you know what you know? Spiritual intelligence, and this is key here, facilitates truth. The stream of truth. We think you use that term, the stream of truth, in the sense that it's flowing, it's dynamic, it's never static. It's always alive and active, energetic. So spiritual truth facilitates the stream of truth, where and how truth flows. And we said that there is no origin to truth. You cannot say truth began here, or truth, we can locate it in scripture, be it the Bible, the Quran, any other, the Vedic text, any other religious or spiritual document. We can't say you can locate it in there alone, or that those texts tell you when and how it began. No, it's before and a part, in and out of all of those texts. And we gave 4 distinct characteristics or identifiers of spiritual truth, spiritual intelligence. We said it is directional. It is disciplined. And we said it is purposeful and it is principled. So let me just give you a little bit more on what I mean by this. Let's take a breath here. Let's just breathe. Okay, so directional means it operates in a particular direction. It it provides a guidance of our thoughts and our efforts. So not just thoughts, but also behavior. And think of it like if you're speaking through a microphone, the sound is going out all around the room, but the microphone is a way of channeling what you're saying and amplifying it for a particular audience. It is disciplined. And by this I mean it corrects, it molds, it shapes, and it perfects the mental faculties for the thought process. Now, not what you think, and not in controlling your thoughts. And sometimes we limit or we think about our thoughts in terms of, I have all these negative thoughts, or I have these thoughts that are not affirming a life. But we really don't understand why and how, because we're not looking at the process through which we channel thoughts. And it's not just what you think, but it's the process of how you channel those thoughts. Now, how you manage those thoughts. So we also said it's purposeful. Purposeful meaning that it is intentional, aiming for a very specific result. And that result, I would say, being the unveiling and the underlying causation. Getting beyond the surface. Moving behind the symptoms. And as we use symptoms of illness or symptoms of society to determine what's wrong with our society, what's wrong with our culture, it goes beyond symptoms. Because symptoms sometimes can point to a multiplicity of causes. They're not singular in what they represent. But when you go behind the symptoms, you're able to see the causation. And by so doing, you're able then to go past the symptoms to understanding, again, the why. Last week, we discussed in brief the historical context underlying the modern evolution of thought in various historical worldviews. If you remember, I talked about the Western worldview, which has evolved over the last 2,000 or more years, gained dominance somewhere around the 17th century, but I also acknowledge that the Western worldview historically is not the only worldview. So I want to be clear on that. I'm limiting the focus of this study to try to impart to you spiritual intelligence as we move through, as we're swimming in and we're living in a worldview that's dominated by a Western view. And we identify that Western view as being a scientific materialism. And we talked about the scientific method and historically how scientific materialism came or evolved to a particular way of seeing the world with variations within it. Last week we ended the discussion and I talked about the theory of magic. And the idea that we all from birth are cast under a spell. Yes. And I know for some of you that concept, that idea may have been troubling. This is a good moment to take a sip of your coffee. I'm a tea drinker, not a coffee drinker. But I understand. I also have a very active four-legged member of my family. So let me just pause to let him out the gate. So we talked about from birth, we all are cast under a spell. That magic is everywhere. And we use it, we succumb to it, we consent to it, we fight against it, often not even realizing what it is we're dealing with. And basically, I gave the very basic element of this magic spell that we all are cast under when we enter this earth realm. And that is language. Language. We learn and speak forms of language, and this language forms our thought process, not just what we think, but our thought processes, how we process the world, how we interpret the world, how we create the highway of our mind, if I can use that, how the traffic of thought is directed, channeled, exited, on ramp, off ramp. One way of breaking the spell and casting another spell is to reimagine language. I'm going to talk about that next week, but I want to just drop that in your thought process today. And when we do that, we push past the accepted margins of language. The important and strict adherence to language in any culture, especially in our Western world, and the marginalization of those who don't speak the language properly is a way of controlling the spell. Controlling the spell. Keeping communities and consciousness, awareness spellbound. The spell, once it is cast, weaves a continued web around us. And we struggle within that web, all of us do. Like a spider in a web or a butterfly in a cocoon, to get out or to conform. And we don't even know often what it is we're trying to break free of. But make no mistake, we are all under the spell. The power or influence of the spell keeps us stuck or keeps us spellbound, bound. Having different political views, either being the far right or the far left, or having different religious views, the radical fundamentalist or the extreme new thought, that's really not the relevant issue. It's like we're all swimming in the same ocean and don't realize it. It all has the same pollutants in it and we don't realize it. As we shared last week, let me go on. All intelligence has two things that it seeks to address, or that it highlights within us, or are the tools, a better way of saying that, are the tools of the intelligence. I think I like that better. The tools with which we use as we navigate through that way, understanding or comprehension. So those two tools I said was epistemology and ontology. So epistemology, we said, is the nature and grounds of knowledge, especially with reference to its limits and its validity. What do we know? How can we know it? What's the limitations of what we're able to know? Or how do we expand our ability to know? Like under that subheading, consumption of knowledge and production of knowledge. Very few of us produce knowledge. Almost most of us consume knowledge. We're consumers of knowledge. We're repeaters of knowledge. We are echoes and mimics of knowledge. We recycle knowledge, but rarely do we produce knowledge. And knowledge production really gets into this idea of spiritual intelligence. We'll open that up a little bit later. Ontology, the nature of being and the relations of being. And today I'll introduce the theory of personhood under this idea of ontology. Theory of personhood. And why shifts in this understanding of personhood are necessary to facilitate a paradigm shift in worldviews. Often we're stuck or we're spellbound in this ocean of understanding with many different kinds of fish in the ocean, but we're stuck there spellbound because we had not shifted our understanding of personhood. What does it mean to be a person? I didn't say a human being. I didn't say an animal. I said person. That's a philosophical and theological idea that we must contend with as we understand this notion of spiritual intelligence. Let's take a breath. Spiritual intelligence is both the knowledge, the source of knowledge, and of truth. So the source of both knowledge and truth. Knowledge is contained in truth, but truth is more than knowledge. Knowledge is necessary within truth, but is not sufficient to know the truth. The truth is far more than knowledge. Knowledge is to truth like pieces of a puzzle is to the complete puzzle. They form pieces, parts, but they're not the whole. And so truth is the whole, knowledge are parts. But you can see how having the right parts is important to having the whole. When we use the word truth, I refer to the Greek word aletheia, and it means what remains when all else is gone. So it's what's left standing. When the house burns down, what's left? When you dissect and deconstruct and take apart, what is left? What remains? That which cannot be destroyed. What remains? Last week we also talked about why spiritual intelligence is important to know about. Not just what it is, but why is it important. And we said spiritual intelligence, I'm going to just go through these quickly, relocates the source of knowledge and facilitates the integration between IQ, intellect, and EQ, emotions, or energy. We said two, spiritual intelligence puts the self as object and the observer in awareness versus the subject or states of body and mind as awareness. It facilitates self-awareness, in other words, the truth of oneself within. A departure from truth within, which is we defined as sin, not in a religious sense, but just missing the mark. Or a lie. And that we defined as energetic blockage. The energy is not freely flowing as it is designed to do. Number 3, we said spiritual intelligence, the nature of being, distinguishes the nature of being from matter to spirit. We're thinking about personhood. Keep that in the back of your mind. It facilitates the knowledge production, How do you know what you know? How do you disseminate what you know? And how do you integrate new knowledge within? Sometimes we know, and we know rightly, but we're stuck there. We're unable to let go or move, expand, or add to our puzzle pieces to add another piece. Remember, knowledge is the truth, like the pieces of a puzzle is to the whole puzzle. So you may have even half of the puzzle or 80% of the puzzle together, but you're missing 20%. So you don't yet have the truth. And being able to open up and say, but I'm missing some pieces. The picture I'm seeing is not all. And I need to be willing to try to put other pieces into this puzzle until I get the whole, until I get to the truth. And we said spiritual intelligence, as I said before, facilitates the stream of truth, where and how truth flows. So this week, part 3, we're talking about how to access your spiritual intelligence. How to access your spiritual intelligence. And I want to pick up here from last week and share more on this idea that I talked about last week, the science of the soul. Science of the soul. And this is important within religious circles and not. We hear this idea of the soul, the word soul, thrown out, sometimes interchangeably with spirit, sometimes not. But it's become a common term and phrase. So I think it's important for this study to just give some clarity as to, at least in terms of how it's being used here. What do we mean when we say soul, or the science of the soul? How do we, using this notion of science, objective observation, how are we to understand what is the soul? So the soul, I would say, begin with this, is the spiritual dimension of intelligence. That's the dimension that the intelligence arises from, is the soul. Let's breathe on that. And just feel that into you and expand within you. So what is the soul? What is the soul? One source says it like this. The soul is an immaterial essence that is often associated with a person's identity, personality, and memories. It is considered to be the non-material aspect of a living being that can survive physical death. Some religions hold that the soul is eternal. Others do not. For the purpose of this study, that is not really material, or you do not have to decide if you believe that or not. It's inconsequential, at least for this study, in accessing your spiritual intelligence. From a philosophical perspective, the soul is a product of consciousness and self-perception, while spirituality views it as a divine creation connecting us to something greater. So, two parallel, not incompatible ideas of soul, but a little different. Going back to Michael Lerner that I shared in our first lesson in his book, Spirit Matters, soul, I'm quoting from him, it says, soul is the personal manifestation of spirit in our own being. Let me say that again for clarity. Soul is the personal manifestation of spirit and our own being. So, in this sense, soul and spirit are intricately connected. What is at play here? In this rendering of soul is our understanding of the soul as the concept, or in the concept of personhood. And some things we need to consider and just delving a little deeper into this is there's some theorize that personhood is not based on having a body, but a soul. Think about that. Good time to breathe. Personhood, by some, is considered based on not a body, but having a soul. So you are a person if you have a soul. Take a breath. I'm going to let my four-legged family member back in. So let's go a little deeper here. Personhood is a theoretical framework that undergirds every world view. Theories of personhood define aspects of the human condition, and the theory, however you define those aspects of the human condition, you choose what to honor and value and what not to honor and value. For example, sexual personhood is an application of a large theory of personhood. We don't have time to unpack all of this. I'm just dropping some little nuggets, some stepping stones for your own learning as I go through this lesson, this seminar. So last week, again, I shared with you that intelligence has to do with two things, epistemology and ontology. And I talked about that a few moments ago. When we consider the subject of personhood, though, I just want to not digress, but I just want to give some context to this idea of personhood. And what do I mean? So it's not just theoretic, but you can have an application, how it is applied and how it is used. According to the African American scholar Orland Patterson, in him writing about the concept of freedom as it pertained to giving a context for slavery in these United States of America, he wrote, "There was no word for freedom in most non-Western languages before contact with Western peoples." That requires a breath. So you mean to tell me that the concept of freedom is not a universal concept that has existed as long as we've existed? That the idea of freedom is somehow connected with the notion of how we understand what a person is. And that has changed and evolved over time. Therefore, the idea of freedom is a more modern Western concept. Remember, I talked about language. There was no word for freedom in most non-Western languages before contact with Western peoples. Or what it could mean is that freedom was so innately a part of what it meant to be a person that there was no need to define it because it was just ontological. It was a state of existence. According to historian Oscar Handlin, in Europe, the antithesis of the term free was not slave, but unfree. That language in itself suggests that the natural state of being was free. And so a slave then was outside of his natural state of being. To be a slave was to not exist in your natural state of what it means to be a person or personhood. Just going a little bit further. According to the Marxist scholar Eugene Genevieve, he argues this, that race relations did not determine the patterns of slavery in the New World. Rather, the patterns of slavery determined race relations. According to this view, racism developed and spread in America as an ideology to rationalize the enslavement and exploitation of blacks by a white master class. Meaning that struggling with this notion of personhood, what does it mean to be a person with a soul? How do I, holding this idea, then rationalize or justify holding people in an unnatural state of existence? Well, during slavery, one of the arguments of many to justify the enslavement and harsh treatment of blacks, men, women, children, babies even, was that they did not have a soul. That those that were enslaved lacked a soul. Remember I told you a few minutes ago that thinking about this idea of personhood, that a person is not defined by a body, the physicality, but whether or not they have a soul. Let's breathe. Let's breathe on that. So the idea that the enslaved population either did not have a soul or that their souls were hopelessly lost or in need of salvation. Time will not permit me to go further into to detail on this, but it suffices to note that the theory of personhood is fundamental to one's world view. So I suggest each of you, examine your own theory of personhood. And don't just rattle off the top of your head, well, I believe a person is this, that, and the other. No, you don't. I want you to look more carefully at your treatment of individuals and communities. Your ideas of their legitimacy to operate in certain ways. Look at what you value or do not value about individuals or communities of individuals. And from that, you can deduce what your theory of person or personhood is. Okay, let's move on. How does one access their spiritual intelligence? That's our quest for today's lesson. There are 4 ways. I'm going to give you 3 today, and I'll briefly explain the 3. And I'll tell you about the 4, what the 4 is, but I will not open that up until our concluding lesson next week. So there are 4 ways that one can access their spiritual intelligence. One, vis-a-vis the breath, the mind, or your thought patterns. And I suggest that don't try to take notes while we're going through the lesson. You can go back and listen because it is on YouTube Live, so you can go back and listen to it the second time. I want you to listen to hear and to breathe in what you're hearing. That's why we're pausing in the breath, because all of the ways of knowing has to do with the breath. So one, vis-a-vis the breath, mind, and thought patterns. So under that, meditation. Meditation is an umbrella term for a variety of practices. It has become popular in our Western world in the last 30 years, and increasingly more popular in our Western world. It is rooted in almost every religious tradition and practice worldwide in various traditions, those that are known in a particular religious tradition and those that claim no religion but are spiritual. Is practiced by those who claim no belief in God or goddess or a divine entity. So meditation. What does meditation do? It is a contemplative practice that focuses the mind using a variety of techniques. Research suggests it has been a spiritual practice, as I said, from the early beginnings of our human existence. However, the word meditation stems from the Latin term meditatum, which means to ponder. Most approaches agree that by practicing meditation, we become more aware of how our minds work, how our thoughts are connected to feelings and behavior. Meditation, although it is an age-old practice, I would suggest to you that it is masculine in its energy, in its representation. And I'm not at all devaluing meditation. I'm not at all attempting to put it in a box and say, sit it over here. And I'm not suggesting that it's something that has been used only by men or that men should only use it. I make a distinction between masculine, feminine, and man and woman, or gender. A masculine and feminine are energies that can be embodied by either sex or gender. When I say that meditation is primarily a masculine, energetic function, what I'm suggesting is that it deals with the intellect. It deals with thought processes that deal with language, that deals with the spell we are cast under and how we become spellbound. It's a limiting way of existing. And I hear you. Meditation seeks to get us beyond the thoughts, to quiet the mind, to get beyond the words. Yes, exactly. But the process of meditation goes through the mind. It's the breath, finding harmony within oneself, contemplation, pondering, breathing. It has to do with thoughts. 2, and I'm going to have to go through these quickly. I'll break them open more next week when we talk about the 4th way of accessing spiritual intelligence. The second way is vis-a-vis the breath. As I said, each one has to do with the breath. But the breath, emotion, and experience of feelings versus breath, mind, and thought patterns. You see the distinction? So we still focus on the breath, but now it's the emotions and experience of feelings. A very feminine approach, a very feminine process. So, what I mean by this, and I talked about emotion. I've been talking about this since we opened up this series. Emotion is a complex experience of consciousness, a complex experience of awareness, bodily sensation, and behavior that affects the personal significance of a thing, an event or state of affairs. And so it is the energy that now gives meaning to what you are feeling, experiencing, inner and outer. Feeling is an experience of an emotion. While the term feeling can be used to describe purely physical sensations such as touch or pain, it goes beyond that. Because we have feelings of happiness that you can't, it's not in our physical body. Feelings are important because they are largely responsible for our entire experience of life. It's our feelings that determine whether we are happy, sad, or content. It has less to do with our environment and the external circumstances of life or even our physicality. But how do you feel about it? This is one of the reasons why feelings and emotions, until recently in our Western world, have been frowned upon and not good qualities for leadership, either in government, in religion, in commerce, and relegated to domestic work because feelings and emotions were considered the domain of the feminine energy, which it is. I would agree it is. But it is energy, it's not thoughts. That energy breaks spells. And it casts a different kind of spell, a spell that cannot be articulated through language, always. Because it's beyond language. Therefore, it is more troubling to those who know they cannot get a grasp on it. And when you're dealing with intelligence and you use going vis-a-vis the intellectual portal, the emotional portal presents a challenge. And again, I am not valuing one over the other. As we build upon this lesson, you will see that what I'm saying is that they both together is where the value lies. And then third, again, vis-a-vis the breath. And let's take a breath. The third way of accessing spiritual intelligence is the breath. Vis-a-vis the breath through the earth, nature, and relational knowledge. Very different from 1 and 2. The breath, earth, nature, and relational knowledge. Or I should say experience, but knowledge that comes from experience. Because I shared with this, shared this with you, I believe, last week, the word knowledge or gnosis from the Greek biblical tradition is not just knowing as collecting of information or data, but it is that which you know that you form a relationship with, and it changes you like a sexual experience. Whether it leads to a pregnancy or not, you are forever changed, and the relationship cannot be undone because you have been touched in that experience. So, nature, the earth, and relational knowledge. Intimacy is another way you can say that. The concept of earth-based spirituality, a profound spiritual network framework, recognizes the earth and all its elements as sacred. And this has existed since we have been on this planet. It originated in ancient societies, was an intimate connection with nature. It was a very fluid connection between humans and all of nature, animal life, plant life, the fowls, the fish, everything, the waters, the streams, the air, the wind, everything. There was an intimate connection where we were not separate, standing outside of nature or lording over it. We coexisted with nature. This spiritual approach serves as the core premise for many religions across the globe. It embodies a deep respect for our terrestrial, our earthly home, and empowers individuals to lead lives enlightened by peace, balance, and a rich interconnectedness. So 3 ways I shared with you. Just a subtext for the breath, the earth, nature, and relational knowledge, and practice. And how do you apply this? And I'll talk more about this next week. The integration of earth-based spirituality principles within day-to-day living can bring significant leaps in personal spiritual growth, personal growth journeys, be it navigating relationships, facing emotional challenges, fostering overall well-being, building a conscious relationship with the natural world can make us more intact with our instinctual wisdom and emotional intuitions, leading to more mindful decisions. And then understanding that we are part of an interconnected web of life nurtures compassion toward fellow beings, forges healthier interpersonal connections. So I've laid out 3 ways of accessing spiritual intelligence. And with the third one, I gave you some ways in how it can, how its practice can be applied and lift us up in our ordinary lives. And so the fourth way is, again, the breath, breaking free from being spellbound. In the breath, the synthesis of all 3, breaking free from being spellbound, accessing the knowledge and potential of one's own power. So, by bringing all 3 of these together is our ability to break free of the spell that's been cast upon us through facilitating vis-a-vis the knowledge and potential of our own power. Okay, as we conclude today's lesson, the takeaway for today is this. 1, spiritual intelligence is holistic intelligence. It integrates our intellect and emotions and manifests the soul as a synchronistic being in harmony with oneself, others, and the universe. As a human species, we either evolve to higher states of consciousness or awareness, or we degenerate as a human species to a lesser understanding of what it means to be a human, a person, or to have a soul. Number 3, accessing spiritual intelligence is our most natural way of being from birth. There's nothing unnatural about spiritual intelligence. It's like the idea of freedom. That word didn't exist. It was only unfree, because being free is our natural state of being. Being spiritual intelligent is our natural way of being. I would say, as I conclude, that spiritual intelligence is our greatest asset in this changing world. And the survival of our species, the survival of the planet, perhaps even, hinges on our ability to break free of being spellbound and unleashing our full potential through our spiritual intelligence. AI, or artificial intelligence, or an alternate intelligence, is slated to be the accepted intelligence, the valued intelligence of the future. And when I say the future, I'm not talking about hundreds of years. I'm talking within my lifetime. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. AI can be a valuable tool in our human existence. I would agree. I don't say we reject it or throw it away or get rid of it. No, it is revolutionizing, transforming, but it's also challenging us to rethink our notion of personhood. What does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to have a soul? If we are not intentional, I would say, AI can potentially cast another spell that we will be bound under for millennia to come. That's the challenge. Right now, in this moment, that we seize the opportunity to break the spell, cast one anew, use our magic, and allow AI to be a tool that we use as we move into the next dimension of our existence. As some have said, the age of Aquarius is dawning. It is upon us. As we move into this new dimension, that we cast a new spell. And that spell is to break out of what we've been bound to and bind us together in a spiritual way of being that lifts and uplifts all of humanity simultaneously. I have to end here, y'all. This has been great. Thank you for being with me today. We'll be back next week. And next week we'll be talking about how to apply your spiritual analysis. We talked about what is it, why should you know, how to access it. Now, how do you actually use it? How do we do this individually and collectively? Thank you for being here. I hope this has opened up some food for thought for you. If so, you can drop me a comment on our YouTube channel or a question. I promise I will respond. Or you can send me an email at triumphalifecenter@gmail.com and I will respond to you. Looking forward to seeing you next week. Be well. Be whole in your approach to life. Bring all of you to the table. Listen to your inner voice. Be aware of your diversions from your inner truth. Let's stop sinning in our error to miss our internal coherence. And let's bring ourselves to oneness as we approach this new dawning, this new day. Have a great week, you all. Take care. I'll see you next week.
Are you a tired ass woman, or do